Boys, it is that time of year. The Balance Manifesto is out. We've got a bunch of very interesting changes, some that I was not expecting whatsoever. Seismic Trap might have survived. Detonate Dead might have survived. We're gonna have to wait until patch notes to know about both of those. But there's a lot to talk about. In the upcoming expansion Siege of the Atlas, as well as the partnered league that goes with it, which is going to be Arch Nemesis, we have got a slew of changes that are mainly going to be happening to self-casting and bows. That means potentially Bleed Bow might be back on the table as a league starter. Self-casting, there's a bunch of changes there. It's going to take a little bit more time to delve deeper into to see what the ramifications of this are going to be. We're really going to need patch notes to be able to tell on a lot of that stuff. So remember, if you want to stay up to date with all of the latest information coming out about 3.17 Siege of the Atlas, make sure that you subscribe to the YouTube channel, hit the notification bell so that you can get updates when all of the videos are going to come out. I'm going to do my best to do one for every single big update that they release, all the way up to the actual release of the expansion. And if these videos help you out, help you understand all the different weird things that happen in these Path of Exile balance manifestos and patch notes and all that, make sure to like the video. Now without further ado, let's get into it. All right, so game balance in Siege of the Atlas. Now, the two major things that they want to change is they want to do hit-based spellcasting and they want to do bows. Those are the main things that they're really trying to fix. And when it comes to hit-based spellcasting, historically in Path of Exile, the way that this game has always worked is that self-cast, or like, just hard channeling casting abilities, tend to not be as good as their counterparts, meaning like mines and traps and totems and triggered spells. And this is just kind of a problem in general with the skills themselves. They've tried a whole bunch of stuff previously, and now they've just decided to go hardcore with the damage percentages when it comes to these abilities. So the TLDR of the hit-based spellcasting is that they're massively adjusting the hit damage growth of most spells. 45% more damage at level 20, 60% more damage at level 25. The idea here is they want it so when you're manually casting that spell, it's going to hit really, really hard. They've particularly changed some specific abilities. Orb of Storms is one that they're changing, but the sneak peek on that is that it didn't really change much at all. They're also making it so that Flame Blast, Lightning Tendrils, and Ice Spear have improvements for high damage against single target. That should be good. We'll see what happens with Flame Blast, like Flame Blast Ignite, as well as Ice Spear Totems. Maybe those are going to get some changes. And another big thing is going to be that Runic Daggers will have a better cast speed value, which should be good for builds like Absolution. They're also going to be making it so that unique Threshold Jewels are not as needed. They're going to be nerfing Unleash to account for the damage that they're giving to basically all self-cast spells. This is going to make it so that you don't feel like you have to use Unleash. They are also going to be lowering the damage from the Totem Trap, Mine, and Trigger effects. Keep in mind, this is things like the gems that allow you to use separate abilities for this. So like Cast on Critical Strike, Remote Mine. So they're going to lower the damage there because the damage of the gems that should normally be in those abilities are getting massively buffed. Of note, they are lowering the damage of Ignite to offset some of those damage increases to Ignite spells. They will be buffing up some specific abilities to make, ensure that those abilities are okay, but that it is what it is. We're going to go through a couple of these. Some notable ones is Absolution here. When we were talking about this on stream at twitch.tv/BigDucks, which you should go follow, by the way, we didn't really know if this is going to apply to just Absolution itself, the gem and the spell that you cast, or if it also is going to apply to the minions. If these changes apply to the minions, Absolution is going to be absolutely ridiculous. I kind of doubt it. These changes are way too big to make me think that it's going to apply to the minions themselves. It seems like it's just going to be just the gem, which I mean will make it a little bit easier at least to get started, and it should scale a little bit better through the campaign, which is cool, but yeah, added effectiveness of damage might make you level with some different gems early on. I know that Inky is going to be happy. Arc is getting a pretty sizable buff. We'll see what happens with that. We got some abilities like Blade Fall, Blazing Salvo, Crackling Lance, all of these down here. Like Fireball is notably getting a pretty large percentage damage. And you'll notice a lot of different abilities as we go through here, just getting massive damage bonuses. Like Lightning Tendrils is now going to be dealing 200% more damage with the stronger pulses instead of 100, and it has 100% damage effectiveness, massive changes to the base damage, all kinds of stuff like this. But do keep in mind, if your build triggers these in any way, if your build uses these for mines, or for totems, or for anything else, these are not actually buffs. It's going to be baseline for you. Nothing is really changing for you, or so they say. Because as you can see, Arcanist Brand is getting a big nerf. Battle Mage's Cry, Blast Chain Mine, Cast on Critical Strike, all of these are getting nerfed to account for that. Also, Soul Mantle unique body armor no longer has +1 to maximum number of summoned totems. Existing items can be updated with a divine orb and a momentary lapse in judgment. I guess rest in peace Soul Mantle totem builds. That's kind of sad, to be honest with you. I mean, I get it. Soul Mantle has kind of been like, you know, the go-to chess piece for totem builds for a long time, but this is honestly kind of sad because we're not really getting anything back as far as I can tell besides the spells themselves getting some more damage. Also notably, Poet's Pen, Cosprey's Malice, and Mjolnir have had their cooldowns increased. That's pretty bad. So if you liked those triggering spells, rest in peace for all of those players. And also they are buffing some of the base traps to get some more damage. Notably in here, Ice Trap was pretty good before. If Seismic Trap does end up being nerfed too hard, Ice Trap is still pretty good. Explosive Trap was pretty good. Blade Trap was okay. These might end up being some decent traps. We're going to have to see as we get patch notes, among other things. As I said, Unleash got nerfed. Cast speed changes. Essentially, they're just adding in like an additional tier of cast speed to runic daggers. Cast speed on rings is going significantly higher, up to 13 to 16%. This is pretty solid for any build that does like to scale cast speed. Should be really, really good. Absolution looking really solid. And of course, this does apply to essences as well. Deafening Essence of Misery now provides the big boy cast speed on one hand and on two hands. Threshold jewels are being pretty substantially changed. They're not going to be doing all of the different stuff that it did before. So they're making it so you don't really have to use the threshold jewels that you previously felt like you might have to. So that's a pretty good change. It just means you don't require those anymore. Things like Heavy Strike now has a 20% chance to deal double damage. That's just baked into the gem now. That's most of what they're trying to do here. Any time where there was a just ability that you always use that like jewel for, they just baked it into it. Orb of Storms did get changed, however, this isn't really anything too big. They basically just made it hit harder, but hit less often, and now you just have to be in the circle. It doesn't need to like bounce across you to be able to hit things. It'll just hit whatever is in the circle. I guess that's okay. I mean, they talked it up as if Orb of Storms is getting some massive change, and it just doesn't really seem like it changed much at all. I guess it's cool. It's gonna hit harder. It's gonna hit less often, so that means there's less impetus on casting faster, but that was kind of the reason why this was good in the first place, is that you cast really fast in the circle and it does lots of damage. So I almost feel like this is kind of a nerf to very early game leveling with Orb of Storms. So Ignite compensation changes. These are the abilities that they're changing to make up for the fact that they have nerfed Ignite. The Armageddon brand getting base damage change is pretty solid for leveling, because Armageddon brand, even without Ignite, was already really solid for leveling, and now it's getting even more damage. I mean, you know, it's going to be pretty good for leveling, even more so than it was before. The notable change is Explosive Arrow now has Explosion that deals 5% more damage with hits and ailments per explosive arrow on target, previously just hits. And ailments is pretty big here. You might have heard years ago how Explosive Arrow was being used to like abuse certain ailments. Think like bleeds, think poisons, think things like that. This is potentially really big. There are some builds floating around, some like Explosive Arrow totem type builds that might be able to do something with this. I'm not too familiar with that, so we'll have to see, but this could potentially be really big. Other than that, not much else in that section there. Hit-based bow attacks. This is... I mean, it's nice to get your hopes up sometimes about these kinds of things, but we've had bow leagues in the past, and we all saw how those went, so I don't have my hopes too high for bows at the current moment, just because we know how GGG has handled bow leagues in the past. So let's see what they do. The main thing that they're doing is they're trying to make it so that the bows themselves and the base damage of bows themselves is significantly better. So for example, improve the damage of bows in general, with some base types getting up to 50% more base damage than before. Keep in mind this says some base types, so that means like the underperforming base types that were already bad are going to be the ones getting up to 50% more. They don't specify here how much the good bow types are already getting, so don't get misled by this too much. This is kind of some flowery language that's meant to make you think that it's amazing. They're changing the bow mastery. They're getting rid of literally like the one bow mastery that I liked and replacing it with other things, so that's cool, I guess. They're reworking quivers to have more interesting stats on them. Notably, they're making it so that quivers have a way to roll skill damage, meaning like physical and chaos damage is part of this now too, instead of it just being elemental damage. So that's pretty solid. The +1 arrow prefix is moving to the core pool. This means that influence items aren't going away as far as we can tell, because they said that they were like figuring out what they were going to do with influence items going forward. Now bows use the two-handed versions of like local added fire, cold, and lightning. This is typically a lot higher than the normal bow ones were, so that should give us more base damage for elemental on bows. However, they are removing some damage from added damage to cold, added damage to lightning, those gems, so it might not be as big of a buff as it seems. We're gonna have to see. And then as you can see here, they are changing a couple of the masteries. They're giving us increases and reductions to arrow speed, also apply to damage with bows. That's pretty cool. Accuracy rating per green socket on your bow, also pretty solid. These are completely worthless. Who cares about Mirage Arrow and Blink Arrow? And then you see the new types of base quivers that have interesting mechanics and stuff going on them. Like Heavy Arrow Quiver has some added fizz damage, which is pretty good. Gain 10 to 15% of physical damage as extra chaos damage from a Vile Arrow Quiver. There's lots of interesting things here that should be pretty solid. But as I said previously, they are nerfing sources of added damage from like support gems, so it's not all sunshine and rainbows. They're giving some and taking some in classic GGG buff fashion, so we're gonna have to see if this is something that ends up being a total positive. They say it's gonna be a total positive, but I'm not completely convinced at this point. We're gonna have to see how the numbers add up once we get the patch notes and once we get Path of Building updated. Because all of this, we did a little bit of the looks in the numbers, and it looks sort of like a buff, but we'll see. Hydrosphere is essentially dead. Hydrosphere has been surviving way longer than I thought it was, but it definitely got nerfed pretty heavily here. They've made it so that Hydrosphere has a 1 second cooldown before it can be hit again. This nerfs pretty much all interactions with it completely. It will still be used for some very hard-hitting abilities, and I think it will still be okay, but most of the interactions that benefited heavily from this is a massive nerf, and Hydrosphere is most likely done for. Specifically, things like generating rage off of Hydrosphere is going to be substantially more annoying now. And yeah, it had a good long life, but you know, Hydrosphere has finally been put in the dumpster, probably where it belongs, because honestly, using that mechanic was really frustrating. This is something that came out of left field that I was not expecting, and it's really, really cool. Triggering marks. So now, essentially what they're making it is they're making it so that marks are permanent. So when you cast that mark on a boss, it just stays there forever. You never have to cast it again if you don't want to move it to a different target. They are also giving us a new support gem that allows any attacks to trigger marks on hitting a rare or unique enemy. So the idea is that now you use this trigger on attack in just a random slot in your gear, and every single attack that you do will apply that mark to a rare or unique enemy now. So no more worrying about having to cast it, any of that. This is substantially better quality of life than anything we've had with mark so far. So as you can see, mark on a hit. Trigger supported mark skills when you hit a rare unique enemy with an attack, any attack. It does give you a small curse effect penalty, but who really cares at that point? Notably, Deadeye is getting a change to the focal point ascendancy mastery, which means your mark transfers to another enemy when marked enemy dies. This is pretty interesting, because now it means that whenever you mark, say, a random rare, it doesn't say anything about transfers to another rare or unique enemy. It just means that it's just going to jump around constantly. You'll auto-apply something to a rare, and then it'll just move around between the different enemies. That potentially makes Deadeye pretty good for a lot of stuff. For clear, it's going to be pretty nice. And the triggering mark when you hit a rare unique enemy has been completely removed from the modifier pool, so now you just put it in your gear. This could be a nerf for builds that don't have a lot of space on their gear and relied on like an Assassin's Mark ring or something like that, because now you're going to need to find room on their gear for it. But overall, this should be a huge quality of life buff for a bunch of builds. If you've been concerned with Fortify and how basically only one Ascendancy can use Fortify right now, they have essentially fix the problem, and now that fortification generation ignores target damage reduction. So people were having problems with things like Cyclone, where they couldn't actually generate fortify stacks because they weren't doing enough damage to mobs that had very high damage reduction. So essentially, when you needed it the most, it failed you. This should work significantly better now, so Fortify should be better for more than just the champion. And now we get on to two big boys. So Detonate Dead. Detonate Dead builds can gain significantly more damage by diluting the pool of Desecrate monsters. If you didn't know, So the way that detonate damage builds were working is that you would get a very specific Spectre which gave extremely high life percentages, and since you had that Spectre in your list, it would be significantly more likely to show up in your Desecrate pool. So you would get these super high life Spectres, you would Desecrate on the ground, and then if you force your build to do Detonate Dead Ignite, the way that ignites work is they proliferate the highest damage ignite. So it would always proliferate that one mob with like the however many hundreds % of extra life that it would spawn, right? So they felt that this was too powerful, but the way they changed it makes me think that potentially Detonate Dead is not dead. A lot of people were saying that this ability would probably be completely gone, but they've just made it so that there's a fixed chance to spawn a Spectre Corpse from the pool. So Ignite Detonate Dead should technically still work, but the idea here is that there is no incentive to bring multiple different high life Spectre varieties, although you still benefit from bringing one high life Spectre into areas, because they're going to make it so that there is a static 15% chance to spawn a Spectre Corpse, rather than a 2x relative weighting compared to all other possible corpse types. So I would say you pretty much change nothing, and it's just a little bit less likely to proc the thing that you're doing. So potentially this is a nerf, but depending on how long ignites last on bosses and such, it should still be fine for boss damage. Because as long as you can get those ignites up ever, it still should do substantial damage. Now, Seismic Trap has been a ability that's kind of been notorious for being really, really powerful recently, and the main reason for that is that the AoE overlaps of Seismic Trap all overlap on top of each other and let you get a ton of burst damage. So what they've done is they've made it so that the area of effect applied to the area of Seismic Trap's burst where they can target. So the idea is they've basically done the same thing that they did to Toxic Rain back a while ago to Seismic Trap now. They've made it so that area of effect is going to both scale the size of the zone as well as the size of the overlaps. So depending on how this goes, we're gonna have to see if it is just a ratio percentage to the point where there is some like sweet spot where area is best. It says it's going to slightly improve the area coverage of the skill while lowering the damage growth from increases area effect without removing their damage benefit entirely. We don't really know how this is going to affect it, but I don't see anything about nerfing the damage of it yet. We're going to have to wait until patch notes to see if Seismic Trap is actually dead, but patch notes should let us know. And then they decided that they were going to nerf Toxic Rain because, you know, why not? Just nerf Toxic Rain literally every single patch. It says it's getting benefits from a lot of mastery changes and from the quiver changes, so obviously they got to nerf Toxic Rain, because it's just too easy to get damage and stuff on Toxic Rain, but I guess it is what it is. Toxic Rain's getting like a 15% damage nerf or something like that. Now, this is something that I was not expecting. I was expecting March of the Legion to be nerfed. I was not expecting this whole slew of changes, because like literally all of this is happening because of March of the Legion. The TLDR of this is that they're taking the blessing mechanic of March of the Legion, limiting it to one blessing at a time, making a blessing support gem. So now you can just have a blessing of an aura on you on any build, it doesn't matter what it is. And they're also making it so that March of the Legion has a stronger blessing effect. But then they decided, well, if we do that, then why we're gonna have to remove Mortal Conviction, because there's no point in taking Mortal Conviction if you can just have a free one anyways. So they're making Mortal Conviction a gem now, removing it from the Blood Magic Keystone, and making it so that it can give you a free aura, but it prevents you from reserving mana. Notably, if you use Essence Worm as well, Essence Worm says it doesn't require you to reserve mana, specifically mana, so you should be able to use the two of those together for like 2 free 50% auras, which should be pretty cool. But it is going to be mutually exclusive with blessings, meaning you won't be able to use a blessing as well as a Mortal Conviction style aura for free. Now, beyond this, they're making it so that Blood Magic also grants 10% more life. That is a bonus for Blood Magic builds. You no longer have to spend those points behind the actual thing. And it says they're changing Supreme Ego to not limit you to one aura and instead give more aura effect based on how much mana an aura reserves. So, like, this just means that Supreme Ego is just going to be good now. If you can take it, it's just a bonus, I guess. We need to see exactly what the changes are and see the keystone itself. And then they are removing the 2 immune to damage builds. So this is going to be the Bone Shatter build that was able to get like perma uptime on Shroud of the Lightless's Shade Form skill. And they're also removing the Strength of Blood, like leech immune to damage character. That one was actually completely immune to damage, so they're getting rid of both of those. And they're changing the Dancing Dervish to be a better item. I'm not too worried about Dancing Dervish, but there should be maybe a little bit easier for Dancing Dervish builds to exist. We'll have to see. Nothing else in here is really that interesting. It's just some like bugs and stuff that they were fixing, but that's pretty much going to be it for the Balance Manifesto. So the TLDR at this point, self-casting is supposedly getting better. We're getting some pretty big buffs to bows. Maybe. I mean, you know how it goes with bow leagues. We might be getting buffs and we might just be getting absolutely nothing. They've said it so many times in the past that like, oh yeah, we're changing bows to make them better. Don't worry, it's gonna be bow league. And then bows are just the same that they've always been. Takes a ton of investment, isn't good on low investment. So we're gonna have to see if we actually finally get a bow league, but you know, it is what it is. So take care, boys. Remember to like the video if you enjoyed it, if it helped you understand everything happened to do with the Balance Manifesto. Subscribe for more content similar to this, and stay safe out there in Ray class. And I will see you guys in the next video.